Okay, I think we are ready to go. I'm pleased to call to order the 51st public meeting of the Mass Gaming Commission on February 7th, 2013. We'll start with the approval of the minutes, several sets of minutes. Commissioner McHugh.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. We have three sets of minutes. The first are the minutes of the meeting of January 17, which are now ready for a vote. Distributed them, I think, a week or so ago, and but at our brief meeting last week, we didn't. They weren't ready for a vote. So today they are. I welcome any comments, corrections, suggestions, and if there are none.
Are you doing all three of them?
Yeah.
This is not at all a correction, just a sort of a point of information on page 5 of January 24th. You volunteered to write a policy on the issue of meetings with outside parties, bidders.
I did.
Is that in your, I just want to lose track of that.
We're not, the way we're going to deal with that, Mr. Chairman, at least in the first run, is in our ethics,
Okay.
enhanced ethics.
Okay.
And the enhanced ethics piece is now out for final comment, and we're very eager to bring that forward.
Okay, great.
2 weeks from today and be done with it.
Great.
But that's the way we're going to deal with it, and if that's not, doesn't cover the waterfront sufficiently, then we can write a supplementary policy, but I think it does.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I had two quick corrections which I shared with Commissioner McHugh before the meeting on the minutes from the 17th.
Okay.
Yes, they were in the nature of typos, important typos, but they will be corrected. So, any other corrections, thoughts? Okay, so let's do them seriatim, so the record is clear. I move that the minutes of January 17, 2013 be approved as written, with the exception of correction of two typographical errors, which will appear corrected in the version that's posted.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Same motion with respect to the January 24 meeting, but I move that they be approved as written.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Approved?
Right, and then finally, of our very succinct meeting, minutes of our very succinct meeting of January 31. I move that they be approved as written.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Approved unanimously.
Okay.
Okay, item number 3, administration master schedule, which as usual we have posted. We've been doing a lot of work on the schedule, both on making sure that we meet our deadlines, but then where possible, trying to moving our deadlines back, speeding them up. And I think that we are at the point now. Let me just see. Can you scroll to slots? Where is this? This is slots, right? No, that's not slots. Slots would be down below.
It starts right here.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So here is the award of the Category 2 license, the slots license, which has been scheduled for December 2nd. And we believe now that we can move that back to September 1st, picking up almost 3 months in the process. There are a lot of variables here which are not within our control. One is having everybody get all their information into us and getting it completed and getting it reviewed properly. And second, the process here, we've got in the schedule, we have almost 2 months for a month and a half for hearings if there are contested decisions, if we make decisions which are contested on the background check phase. So there are a lot of things which are beyond our control, but we think in good faith that we can move this deadline back now to September 1st. So our aspiration will be to make the license, the slots license award, Category 2 license award by September 1st. So we'll rejigger this schedule now to do that. The other, and we're looking at the casino licenses too, but at the moment, they are still scheduled to be done by the first couple of months of next year. We're also doing a lot of work on the evaluation process. After the Phase 1 background checks are completed, as everybody knows, we'll be getting into Phase 2 applications where the commission will be receiving the final applications with host community and surrounding community agreements, and then making decisions on who will ultimately the winners be. And there's a multi-part process that we're going through, which includes accumulating all the criteria in a way that can be made public to the bidders. Much of that criteria is already in our legislation, but as you know, we're adding to those criteria. There is the process by which we will review it. What kind of a team will we have to help us review it? How will we handle it? And in some respects, most importantly, or also very importantly, is the weighting of those criteria and how we're going to do that. To what extent can we audit? Can we make it a measurable metric? To what extent do we have to protect subjectivity, et cetera? And I think maybe Commissioner Zuniga and maybe Commissioner McHugh have been working on this one to sort of bring us up to date and put issues on the table if there are any.
I can start with one comment / question for the commission, and one is, as we refine these criteria and bring it forward, one question in my mind that I wanted to confirm was whether, to what extent all of that criteria needs to be on regulations to conform with what's in our immediate or in our proximate milestones. I assume that a great deal of that would by necessity have to be in regulations, but frankly, not all of it. It could be, certain sections could be broad, or certain sections could be later outlined by policy and by the form of response that we generate. So that was one assumption that I wanted to talk about, because the time for our regulation writing is ongoing.
Well, and here is the guts of the reg writing process for Phase 2. And this has us having to deliver draft regs to the local governing, whatever board.
Local Government Advisory Committee.
Local Government Advisory, on March 14th, barely a month from now. Then there is an ongoing process of review and comment and iteration, and they can be amended to some extent.
Sure.
But for the most part, under this schedule, the regs have to be done in substantial draft form by March 14th. On the other hand, we're talking about this very complicated process of compiling all of our criteria, turning it into some kind of a usable evaluation tool, and discussing the process by which we will use that tool and involve the public and so on and so forth. And the question that the commissioner is raising, and he and I talked about this a little bit yesterday, is need we make the teeing up of the evaluation process triggered or blocked by this deadline of March 14th? So we have to get that whole process of teeing up the evaluation process done before March 14th, so it can be included in the regs that start through the approval process. Or can we have some portion of it in the regs, but later on set out publicly within a thorough process, everybody comments on the evaluation process, so we can use some more of the months here to figure that out. And, you know.
Yeah, I'll just append to that. The parallel is perhaps a great example of what we did on Phase 1. The form for response was not part of the regulations. It was a reference, but it came contemporaneous, if you will, to the regulations. And I think that helped, to some degree, I'd like to think, it helped our applicants preparing information that would ultimately be requested. So I see a parallel there, and I wonder to what extent can we try to accomplish that, or need not be constrained by the March 14 date.
But I had been working under the assumption that these would be in the regulations, that the criteria would be in the regulations. The application doesn't have to be. The application flows from the criteria. There's a matrix now of principles that's ready for, can be ready for discussion next week, and it seems to me we ought to get on to that process.
Principles of evaluation?
Yes, the evaluation criteria. Commissioner Zuniga and I have been working on a matrix. We've got now 5 categories with a bunch of subcategories. It's not complete, but it's in ready enough form to have a discussion about, an intelligent discussion. So we could do that next week. We could explore the possibility, although I don't think it's the most desirable possibility, of saying, putting in a regulation that we will evaluate applications according to a schedule that we will publish on the website after a vote and period of public comment. That gives us additional time. But insofar as the evaluation criteria are concerned, it seemed to me that we were striving to get that done as early as possible so that people preparing their applications, particularly if we're going to move the slots licensing process back in order to accommodate a variety of interests, we need to get that done in principle, even if it's not done in final, so people have a target at which to shoot. And then the application, as I say, flows from that, the form of the application. And then figure out the scoring system as quickly as we can, but we can take more time with that. I say the scoring system, the evaluation system, because
Right.
there may not be a scoring system.
The evaluation.
How are we going to deal with this massive data that we get, and how are we going to deal with it comparatively? So I would propose, Mr. Chairman, to put a placeholder next week for a discussion of the preliminary of this matrix, and Commissioner Zuniga and I can certainly finish it between now and then and present it for discussion next week, and then plan to have those criteria in these regs. I think that's doable, and then move on from there with other things.
That makes sense to me. I mean, and this is always, it's subject to change. If for some reason or other we
Sure.
feel like we can't
Sure.
make it, then we can't make it. But I agree with you. I mean, we clearly want to give the bidders as much heads up as we possibly
Right.
can. First on the criteria, and second on the way we will analyze and weigh those
Right.
criteria.
Right.
And it would be ideal to get as much of it as possible in the regs.
Right.
So let's at least set out, as you're saying, let's at least see if we can get the criteria into the
Right.
regs, and then we can follow that with the
Right.
evaluation process
Right.
and
Right.
weighting. Yeah.
Right.
That makes sense to me. Okay, good.
Could I say one other thing about the master schedule? And hopefully in 2 weeks we'll have this resolved, because in the regulation writing process, we have focused, Attorney Grossman is focused, and I've discussed it with him, and how we're going to deal with involuntary surrounding communities, or involuntary surrounding community issues. Remember that in our statute, a surrounding community is a community that has reached an agreement with a developer to be a surrounding community, an applicant to be a surrounding community. But there is also in the statute a provision for petitioning us to be a surrounding community if negotiations have failed and not resulted in a voluntary process. The question arises as we drill down into the detail, how do we deal with those applications? Because once we make the designation of a surrounding community, the surrounding community and the applicant then have a 30-day period within which, it's that right there, Mr. Chairman, that area right there, then have a 30-day period within which to negotiate an agreement, failing which we have to have in place some protocols for bringing them to either agreement or an imposed protocol. And so we want to, we need to give a deference to that, but we don't want to string out the process unduly to take account of that. So we've got some ideas as to how we can do that. We want to think those through, and in 2 weeks, I anticipate that we'll be able to put something out after consultation with John Ziemba and working things through, getting some thoughts with Attorney Grossman, and have a plan to propose in a couple of weeks.
Okay, that's great. And, you know, I've mentioned, and we've all mentioned many times, there are a number of things in here that are not within our control.
Right.
We can sort of make our best
Right.
judgments, but
Right.
part of the incentive for the developer to make sure that there are deals done, agreements signed with all the
Right.
surrounding communities, is so they don't get delayed by this
Right.
process.
Right.
So that's great. Anything else in that topic? So so you said 3/14, we're going to see whether we can have our first round of, next week, our first round of conversations on the criteria.
On the evaluation criteria,
Right,
yeah.
okay.
I have one more thing. Mr. Chair, you had asked me to take the lead on articulating the type of advisors that we will need for the evaluation, which comes certainly after we receive those proposals or the applications. I've made some inroads and some research, and Commissioner McHugh and I agree that the first order of business is really fine-tuning and finalizing the criteria, after which advisors would flow. So,
Yeah, that makes, I
it's-
sort of think of that as part of the process, you know, what
Right.
would be the process, but I agree
Right.
with that. Clearly, criteria is step one, no question about it. Okay, great. The only other thing is, you want to scroll down to the hires. We're talking about our executive director today. Yeah, okay. Workforce development and diversity, we can get an update from Commissioner Stebbins. That process is now underway, right?
Yes, it is. We're doing our first round of interviews with candidates. We have about 16 to 17 candidates out of our pool who we thought had interesting resumes and we wanted to have an initial interview with.
Great, so that's targeted for, what does that say, April 10th, so we should be well in place for that one. We also are in the process now of soliciting resumes for Director of Research and Problem Gambling. I'm not sure.
Which probably needs to be put up there.
It's to be
Sorry?
updated. We need to update that.
Okay,
It's
so
not
we need to
updated.
get that on there with
Yeah.
that amendment.
Yep.
And that will be done within a month or so. And then the third one, and this is now in our packets, is the Director of Licensing. We have the Director of Licensing here being hired, what is that?
I think it's June 3rd.
I think we've felt, Commissioner Cameron and I have felt that we could probably do sooner the better on that. So we have a draft job description for the Director of Licensing in your packets, which we would like to get approved or modified and approved and start this process rolling. Did anybody have a chance to have comments on the Director of Licensing?
Mr. Chair, I did not receive any, but I didn't get this out till late yesterday, and we did modify it again this morning. But yeah, I would welcome comments, and we're prepared to move ahead with this. We do think it's an important position. It really does go hand in hand with investigations. And it would be important to get a licensing system in place, so we're prepared to license as soon as we're able to. So this is a critical position, and probably our last critical hire as far as a director
Right.
position.
Right, and if we're gonna have the slots decision on September 1st.
Yes, we need this
Then having
person
the
to-
process up and
yes.
ready to go, because
Correct.
we will start having to license contractors, et cetera, September 2nd. So I think moving this up is all to the good, so let's move that up a little bit. I had a couple of thoughts. There's two kinds of licensing in my view. One is licensing the initial gaming facilities. And then 2 is everything else. And we're not really looking to this director to be in charge of the licensing of the facilities. That's sort of what we're doing now. That person can play a role in that when they get here.
Well, the processing piece, yes. The decision will be made by all of us, of course, but then the actual processing of the license and.
Yeah, well, okay, so it's just, this sort of implies the way this is written.
Where are you looking, Mr. Chair?
Duty number 2, task with responsibility for receipt, review, control, security, and follow-up for licensing and registration, including applications for gaming applicants, under Section 8. And qualifications of officers, directors, and other natural persons. I mean, that is well underway. That's really falling under the IEB at this point.
The
way it's
investigation
working.
piece is,
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
So, it's not that big a deal, but.
Well, I beg to differ a little bit. It's not that big a deal. No, that's right. But it ties back into definition of functions, which then ties back, everything ties back into everything else. At some point, breaking out an organization chart and seeing really where things flow. But for the moment, that was the one part that I didn't understand entirely, because the IEB is basically looking at qualifications and doing the investigation. And so where is it that the line of responsibility between the IEB and the Director of Licensing kicks in, at least insofar as the casinos are concerned?
Right. That's the point I was
Yeah,
making.
the
I mean,
point you were making.
As far,
So I'm finished.
well,
So
I
you think it's a little misleading the way it reads, and that,
just to make it clear, and
Uh-huh.
and Commissioner McHugh was right, and it's worth being clear. The first bullet point is really not the same as the others. For all of the others, they will, the licensing person and their department will be responsible for receipt, review, control, security, and follow-up for all the applications
Right.
that we have for grant license. For the applications license applications that are going on now, for the initial bidders, the IEB is doing all that. And the licensing person will have whatever to do with it, but it'll be sort of incidental once he or she comes on board.
well, I
Let
look.
me just finish that.
Okay,
So,
sure.
for everything else, all the other licenses, once we've awarded the licenses, and all the other licensing begins, then I would say all those completely apply. All that would come under, and then the roles would change, because the licensing person will receive, control, secure the applications, shovel them to the IEB where investigations are necessary, get the results back, and process them. So that's the way I see it working.
Okay, and I think you're correct about that, other than I really do like a checks and balance. Reviewing those applications for, not the initial application, but all of the investigative work that's done, and just making sure everything is in the order in which it's going to be needed for licensing. I mean, bringing in someone with real licensing background that understands all of those steps. I see it as a really connected. The two directors will be very much working hand in hand.
On the bidders,
Well, on every license that we do. I really like the idea of a director of licensing who has experience, if we're able to do that. Looking at everything that's been done investigations-wise, as, just almost like a review process for all the work that's been done to date, another set of eyes. So, and maybe this is the way it reads, but I thought it was really important to have the licensing person on deck, the director, in order to just kind of that final assurance for the commission that everything is in order. Every last piece of the investigation and anything else that would be needed to properly license. So
to license.
Well, yes, almost, I understand your point that everything's been done now. The application is being reviewed, those investigations are underway. But I just, again, thinking of what those responsibilities are, and I've had really in-depth conversations about the licensing responsibilities, because I wanted to learn more about it. with those who have done it in other jurisdictions. And it really is a process that works hand in hand with the investigations. Typically, now, of course, we don't have a licensing director yet, but typically that work would be done, all of that review work. For example, if we're using IEB to do that review process for an initial application now. Typically, if, for example, we end up licensing someone later on for whatever reason, that work would be done, that initial work would be done by the licensing division. And that's how
Well,
it
that's-
works
yeah.
well in other jurisdictions, but because of our startup nature and the fact that we are moving this process along and hiring staff as we can, that initial work has fallen to the IEB. Typically in other jurisdictions, that is not the function of IEB to do that initial review of an application for completeness.
In other words, the administrative
Review.
compliance,
Yes.
the desk review,
Correct.
not the enforcement and investigation, but the administrative, shall we call it,
It
review.
would be done by the license, that initial work would be done by the licensing division, and then a completed application is sent for investigation. But because we're not set up that way yet, we have been trained by licensing experts on how to do this initial review of an application and make sure we get the additional materials that we need. So if that's helpful at all, Mr. Chair, but that's typically how this would happen.
Yeah,
So it would be an initial review.
I don't disagree with that, but it isn't the way it's working. It's, if we don't happen to have the licensing person here, plus this.
But that would be their
If
responsibility.
they were here, but they're not gonna come in and, the only role for both IEB and licensing people in the initial licensing of facilities is in phase one, the background checks. The second phase, too, has got nothing to do with the IEB and the licensing people, or little to do with it. It's gonna be mostly with us looking at all these other criteria.
Can I
But
just
still,
add-
And the background checks will be essentially done by
but
the
a
time this person.
review of, we're going to lay out criteria, and that review, to make sure it's been submitted properly, would be a licensing function.
Can I just say, in an ideal world, that may be the way it works. I haven't been through this before, none of us has, but maybe that's the way it would work. But it seems to me, if we just look, let's assume we advance that hiring date by 2 months. So we get the hiring, the licensing person at the end of April. And we're trying to advance the slots license issuance by the beginning of September. There has got to be a robust licensing scheme in place by then to deal with the people who are going to be applying for licenses, operators' licenses, construction licenses, supplier licenses.
Yep.
There's a huge amount of infrastructure that's got to be built between the end of April and September when we award the license. It seems to me that this licensing and it also seems to me that the transitioning from the phase one to the phase two piece of the application is itself an enormous amount of work, for which we're in the process of assembling an evaluation team of outside professionals to help us get a handle on it. And it seems to me that we ought to be clear in our own minds at the outset that this licensing director really can perform the best service to the commission at this stage, given where we are, by coming in and focusing immediately on creating the licensing infrastructure that's going to be necessary to deal with the construction, maintenance, supply, and then ultimately operating people going forward, and not be burdened by having to deal with something that we've already got a structure in place to deal with. So I would echo the chairman's concern about that, though if down the road we, because of one reason or another, have to issue another casino license after this is all in place, the licensing director would play a different role.
Yeah, I mean, what this really indicates is our research of best practices in gaming and how all of these directors would interact with one another. So that's what this reflects.
Right.
I do hear you and understand that that's not how we're operating right now. So I mean, I'm happy to make a change if you think this is unclear in what we're doing right now.
I think I think we can work this out when we're talking to people, but I think for purposes of clarity, it would, and I could take a shot at giving you a suggestion on how I would redo that. But I think with that amendment, I think we're all on the same page.
Right.
You know, I think
Right.
Commissioner McHugh said exactly what I was trying to say well. The only other thing, I'm not sure how I feel about this. Under minimum qualifications, I know we've gone through this before. Bachelor's degree required means that we couldn't consider somebody who didn't have one. And, you know, I don't know whether we really want to do that. You know, I can imagine somebody who's come up through the tribal gaming world who might not have a college degree, it might be a community college, you know. Bill Gates doesn't have a college degree. I mean, there are exceptional people who don't happen to, so I throw that out. It's not a bar to me, but I'd hate to find a great candidate
Yeah.
who's kind of an on-the-job training type person. In this world, you could sort of imagine such a thing would happen, that we couldn't consider, or we had to do the process over again because we've used a verb form, which is too strict.
Mr. Chair, perhaps as a way of, to address that particular instance, which we've done in other job descriptions, A and B could be combined. In other words, to read a bachelor's degree or equivalent professional experience.
We've used that, I've seen that
Yeah.
before. I mean,
In other
for
words,
my money, I prefer that, but
Right. I mean, and it would be up to the hiring manager to ascertain what level of equivalency of professional experience.
My experience with reviewing resumes is people submit whether or not they have it or not.
Right.
But we can't
But it will-
consider it.
Well, yeah, I believe, we had one of our directors' position where we haven't required it, I don't think so.
I think we put I don't know, I'm not sure, I can't remember.
But
Yeah.
that would be fine, I don't have any problem with that, looking at it.
Okay, so let's.
I have only one very small addition, but that's now the subject of most of our job descriptions, to just clarify that all candidates will go through a background check, which includes financial background.
That's in here.
But that's,
I think we have
It's
it
in here?
pretty clearly
Yeah.
spelled out.
oh, I usually see it
E-
at the end, sorry,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah,
I'll make that change, Mr. Chair.
okay, great. Okay, anything else under master schedule or sort of general administration?
Did we need a motion to approve
Oh,
that posting with the appropriate changes?
I don't.
We haven't done
remember.
it.
I don't think.
We haven't done it.
We haven't done it in the past.
But what we should do, I think, is agree to make Commissioner Cameron the hiring manager. I think we will continue our process of designating a single commissioner to take the lead here, rather than setting up a subcommittee. My recommendation would be that this one be Commissioner Cameron, as the IEB was. If everybody's okay with that, let's just go with that.
I agree.
Okay?
Yes, I'm in agreement.
So we'll make a couple of edits and get this posted and get moving ASAP. Great.
Mr. Chairman, we're using a loaner computer today. Is it all right if I shut the master
Yes,
schedule down?
we're all set.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lone Orr from the Loney. I think that is everything. Anything else, Commissioner Zuniga, Director Glovsky, anything else? Okay, we're going to go to 3B, which is the interview with Executive Director candidate. Why don't we have a quick break while we find that candidate and bring him in, and then we'll convene again in 5 minutes and 3 minutes and get started. Meeting number 51. We'll get to you in a minute. Before we pass the ball over on agenda item 3B, interview with our executive director candidate, I just want to take time to go back over the process a little bit. This is our most important hire, maybe the most important hire that this commission will ever make. It's important that we stick with the process that we decided to, and that we remember what the process is. We've tried to be and are trying to be as transparent about this whole process as we possibly can, given other considerations of personal privacy and confidentiality and so forth. We started this whole, the commission started 10 months ago, a little over 10 months ago. We spent the first 4 months or so kind of getting ourselves organized and hiring a search firm, jury staff, to do the ED search for us. And then at our meeting on August 7th, 2012, which is to the day, 6 months ago, we started the search process. And at that point, we talked about what kind of a search process we would use. All of you, and you are, everybody in the public is familiar with the open meeting constraints that are a part of our process. So we talked about a couple of different ways we could go. And just for the record, I want to read through some of the minutes from August 7th, 6 months ago. Commissioner, as we talked about the ED process, Commissioner Stebbins stated that the commission should have a further discussion on the 2 search and interview scenarios. Commissioner McHugh stated that the 2 scenarios are in the commissioner's meeting packet. Under the first scenario, a single commissioner would work with jury staff and conduct the screening process. Under the second option, a subcommittee would conduct the screening. Under the single commissioner screening approach, all materials would be submitted by the applicant to the single commissioner. The commissioner would select the finalists, and the finalists would appear at a public meeting with the commission after there had been a background investigation and drug screening. One clarification I want to make, we decided that finalists, putting the words in quotes, one would become a finalist after they, A, completed a background check, and B, agreed to take the job if offered. We decided not to call people in to be a finalist and have interviews without telling us that they're prepared to take the job if it were offered. Then our minutes go on to say the materials submitted by those who were not finalists would remain confidential as part of their personnel file, and there would be no record of the interviews the single commissioner held with those applicants. The interviews between the finalists and the commission would be public. Other than the candidate's resume, the materials used in the final interview would not be public documents. Chairman Crosby asked if jury staff had a preferred method as between these two, a search committee and a single commissioner, for conducting the interviews. Commissioner Stebbins stated that jury staff's main concern is for the commission to choose a process that will enable them to assure applicants that the content of interviews and materials they submit are confidential unless and until they become finalists. Commissioner Cameron stated that having someone in the room taking minutes during an interview changes the dynamic of the interview, and that would have been required under the search committee process. She stated that she is very comfortable with one commissioner moving forward with this process. Chairman Crosby stated that the commission could move forward with the single commissioner process, and if the designated commissioner determines the process is not working, a subcommittee model could be utilized. The commission decided to move forward with one commissioner conducting the initial interviews and selected Commissioner Stebbins to carry out that screening, what we refer to as the hiring manager. Commissioner McHugh stated that he did not agree with the single commissioner approach to screening, but understanding the commission's contrary view, agreed that Commissioner Stebbins is an excellent choice to carry out the screening process. So we thought through the options and made a conscious decision to go with a single commissioner taking the load on this. It's the model that we've used in most of our other senior hires. I think it's a good model. It does what the best we can to protect the confidentiality of candidates and thereby maximize the size of our pool that we get by being able to protect their confidentiality. And Commissioner Stebbins, working hand in glove with jury staff over the course of the last 180 days, has worked on that process rigorously and has managed the entire recruitment and review and assessment process. Having said that, Commissioner Stebbins, would you like to?
Can I just,
Sure,
I hate to
yeah.
interrupt, but we've used that in all of our other hirings,
Have we?
Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
And we have now a handbook that has been promulgated and published that governs all of our hiring and other conditions of employment and the like, and it has provisions in it for a hiring manager in each case in which we make a hire as well. So this is part and parcel of a standard practice that we announced at the outset and have been faithful to ever since.
Right. And we use finalists in two different ways, and we shouldn't, but colloquially, people think about finalists as we're starting to get to the end of the game, but we have a very formal meaning of what is a finalist. And a finalist in our formal process, as I said, is when a candidate has gone through the vetting process by the hiring manager, has passed all of the background check criteria, and has told us that they would accept a position if offered. That defines finalist in our formal process. Okay, anything else on that? Commissioner Stebbins, how would you like to take it from here?
Sure. I'll just provide some background as to the search that I conducted over the past, again, conveniently enough, on the 6-month anniversary, with our friends from jury staff. Because we clearly stated our goal, finding an individual with gaming commission experience, we knew immediately we'd be recruiting a candidate from outside the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. As much as we knew that this was an incredible opportunity for an executive with gaming commission experience, we also knew that we had to somewhat assume a salesman mentality, and that we had to impress upon a candidate the benefits of assuming this position, and what a great state Massachusetts is to live in, despite tomorrow's weather projections. Jury staff commenced an aggressive and what I thought was a thorough outreach to leaders in the gaming industry, approached approximately 100 individuals who either had gaming commission experience, leaders currently employed at gaming commissions, candidates with industry experience, those interested in the position, or individuals who would be a solid source of referral of candidates. And as this process began, we are quickly reminded that we had two challenges in our recruitment effort. We expected when we came to recruiting candidates, we would be finding, again, someone who would have to consider relocation. Several candidates we approached were interested in the position but not willing to take the step of uprooting their family to locate. 21 prospects were contacted and invited to be considered for the position, but for various reasons could not consider the position because of relocation. In fact, all the initial interviews I did with candidates, I was in my first round of questioning whether they had considered that possibility and actually talked about it with their family. In addition, we informed candidates of, as Mr. Chairman, you mentioned the public nature of this process, including this final public interview. We were asked on a couple of occasions whether the commission would reconsider the final public interview step because the candidate who was currently employed would not wish to participate in a public interview. I was steadfast in reminding candidates of the commission's commitment to this public step throughout the interview process. During the course of identifying candidates who could become suitable finalists for the commission to consider, I assessed and reviewed over 21 candidates that were presented to me from jury staff. We also, by the way, received a handful of resumes and cover letters from our official posting as well. Of the 21 candidates presented by jury staff, I personally spoke with 17 candidates via conference calls. These candidates were rich in background in gaming commission experience, some with industry experience, currently employed, previously employed, members of the commission, actual commission staff, constituted the group of candidates I spoke to. I also conducted multiple reference calls for candidates I felt would also be well positioned to be identified as finalists. Some of these candidates, as you know, were invited to Boston to meet with us, meet me in person. And fortunately, that didn't scare too many out of consideration. But
Could have skipped that step.
I know. And also have time to introduce themselves to you and to our staff, which every time we had a candidate come in, seemed to be more and more people that they'd have to visit with. As stated in the guidelines for conducting our search, I was not at liberty to discuss individual candidates with each of you, but was allowed to receive feedback from our senior staff as to their impressions. I narrowed down our list of prospective candidates and decided to invite 2 of those candidates to be finalists after completion of a background check. I will mention that a second finalist decided to decline our invitation to be a finalist at this time. Jennifer Reske, who's the Deputy Director at the Indiana Gaming Commission, appreciated our invitation, but for family reasons could not relocate to Massachusetts at this time. Jennifer forwarded me a letter. I'll just mention some of her thoughts. Dear Commissioners, it's been an honor to participate as a candidate in the Executive Director selection process. I'm regretfully not in a position to serve as a finalist. A series of events transpiring since I began this process has led me to conclude it's not feasible at this point in time to relocate. It's really a pleasure to meet each of you. I have immense respect for the wealth of talent and experience you bring to the regulation of gaming, and I believe Massachusetts will benefit greatly from your dedication to ensuring transparency, thoughtful deliberation, and the strict but fair regulation of the gaming industry. I am pleased, however, to report and present for your consideration our finalist candidate, Mr. Rick Day from the state of Washington. From the outset of being introduced to Mr. Day, I was immediately impressed with his years of service with the Washington State Gaming Commission, the second oldest gaming commission in the country, coming up on approximately 40 years. As well as
Not all him.
Not all him, correct. As well as his experience in law enforcement. As you can see from his resume, which was included in your packet, he has tremendous experience running an agency that is commensurate in size with respect to the number of employees we expect to employ. And I was impressed with the experience he had of managing and organizing a new agency as he had undertaken in Montana. Additionally, his work on the subject of internet gaming was also a highlight, as we collectively know that this issue will be front and center in the national policy debates as we move forward. In talking with Mr. Dave's references, I was impressed that, one, I had an opportunity to talk with Mr. Dave's current chairman, as well as contacts from his work experience in Montana. References I spoke to stressed his strong management skills, willingness to have employees feel part of a team, contribute their ideas and suggestions was a positive, especially as we move forward with the recruitment of new employees. He has also worked successfully with a diverse 9-member board that includes both regular and ex officio members. One of his colleagues in Washington State highlighted his hands-on on-site visit to the state's 27 tribal casinos around the state. Additionally, through relationships that we, the Commission, have established in our short existence, I invited additional viewpoints and references as to Mr. Day's work performance and experience. I'm happy to say that that feedback has also been overwhelmingly positive. Mr. Chair, my colleagues, I am pleased to present Rick Day to you, invite him to offer some opening comments before we have some questions of our own.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Stebbins, for the kind information and introduction. I appreciate it. And good afternoon, Chairman Crosby and members of the Commission, Massachusetts Gaming Commission. And thank you for this opportunity, except for tomorrow's weather. My name is Rick Day, and I'm Director of the Washington State Gambling Commission. Our decision to seek the Massachusetts Executive Director position was difficult, as I am fortunate to be part of a successful agency, have a great staff, and support of the commissioners, and a beautiful place to live. But I refer to our because my spouse of 35 years, Jan, is critical to all of these decisions and has been involved in this thought process from the beginning. And also fortunate to have 3 growing children and 4 grandchildren on the western side of the country. I believe you have my resume, as Commissioner Stebbins pointed out. Essentially, I started as a local law enforcement officer in 1975, served 23 years for the state of Montana in several positions, and 11 years for the Washington State Gambling Commission. I received my Bachelor of Science from Montana State University, and then much later in life, I completed my work on a Master's of Public Administration at the University of Washington. I want to take a minute to congratulate this commission as well on the results of the competitive process for Phase 1. And it just, I think, adds to the excitement about what the future is. And actually, this position offers me an interesting and challenging opportunity to join a new team, and contribute to building a new agency and new foundations for a successful gambling industry. So thank you very much again for this opportunity. I'm very excited about taking questions, and turn it back to the chairman.
Thank you, and welcome. Commissioners, fire away.
Mr. Day.
Commissioner Campbell.
I frankly am very impressed with your resume, your background in investigations, law enforcement, public safety. I think of much of what we do here as an aspect of public safety. And as you are probably aware, we are really starting our background investigations at this point. We are using a combination of experienced investigators who are contracted by us and our state police members who are experienced investigators but have not had the experience with gaming investigations. I'm assuming that I know about your extensive experience in public safety, and I assume that you have that same experience with gaming investigations. Could you tell me a little bit about your expertise with gaming investigations?
Commissioner Cameron, I would be glad to do my best to expound in that area. The Washington State Gambling Commission and our processes, as a matter of fact, even the organization of the commission is very similar to the Massachusetts Gaming Commission and its recommendations to move forward. We, in that process, do investigate each applicant. As a matter of fact, I agree with you on the public safety side in particular, and one of the reasons is because that process does provide the entrance into the gaming system, and it's absolutely critical to make sure that the licensing process goes far enough to make sure that those individuals are qualified. In Washington, even, it's if that determination is made, the commissioners aren't allowed to limit that decision. So it's even I think as relevant as it is here. We in that process investigate approximately 3,500 different organizations, and we also do a background in financing, for instance, with tribal governments in case they actually seek outside financing relative to the licenses and establishments they create. We then as well put that entire process through an investigation which includes tracing funds. We send our agents internationally if necessary to make sure we can follow those funds and the records and identify the people that are involved in each one of those license applications. And it's not just with the larger tribal casinos. We actually complete that process with the smaller businesses in the state of Washington.
Smaller businesses, meaning?
Meaning non-tribal would be house bank card rooms in Washington. Informally, a lot of people call them mini casinos, but from the gambling regulatory side, we call them house banked card rooms. They're
House paint card rooms?
Banked. Blackjack.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Blackjack and other card games that the house is involved or funds.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's certainly expertise we could use.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I had a series of questions, particularly given your long and varied and successful career in a number of startup operations. But I wanted to start with the vision portion of your website, which says that you'll build positive partnerships and relationships. There are 5 or 6 things there that are part of the vision of the. Could you help me understand with whom the relationships are, and why that part of the why is that part of the vision of the Washington Gambling Commission?
Commissioner McHugh, I will definitely give that a try, and I might start with the side of the beginning of the vision statement there as well, because it refers to public confidence.
Right.
And that's actually what the following 4 or 5 principles now at this point, you might have me there, that are referring to. So each of the relationships has a lot to do with that. Our ability, of course, with tribal governments, as that's a government entity, to have a relationship where there's mutual respect. Even with our licensees, the state licensees, we want to operate with respect, relationship with them. People are generally in business, and they're there to make a living and do it correctly. The regulatory atmosphere is there, not as a barrier, but as to ensure that continues in that fashion. We also do that with our law enforcement agencies. It's also very important to us. Whatever jurisdiction we operate, with actually multiple task forces and involved in joint law enforcement activities across the state of Washington. So it's those relationships that we are talking about, not to mention the public side, to try to make sure we reflect those standards of make sure the industry in Washington is seen as honest and legal.
Do you see a difference between the regulatory aspect of the commission's role, and the law enforcement aspect of it? Your commission, as this one, has both functions, and is there a difference in those, in the way one approaches the subjects of either the regulation or the law enforcement activity?
Commissioner McHugh, the short answer to that is yes. But from the other side of it is a lot of the bulk of the work, which would be the investigative follow-up, the building of cases. In many cases, with the criminal investigation is, sure I don't have, you already know this part, so I'm just going to hit it real quick, is the elements of the particular, whether it's a civil offense or a criminal offense, that's what the focus of the investigation is on. And the weight of the evidence relative to the civil side is deemed allegedly not to be as extensive as the reasonable doubt on the criminal side, but in actual practice, oftentimes there isn't a lot of difference in the two criteria that are needed.
I asked that question because I've been struggling as I've been working in this position with the difference in emphasis. It's not a difference in kind. The difference in emphasis between the law enforcement piece, which, as you described, focuses on, say, the elements of the crime or the elements of the civil infraction and the consequences of that, and the regulatory side, which in many respects seems to be more corrective and working with the industry and with the public to find best practices and the like, that is not so much focused on elements as it is on policy and its implementation. Is that part of, that must be part of what you encountered as the director of the Washington Gambling Commission as well, both of these roles?
Commissioner McHugh, I think you point out one of the significant sides. It's not that with gambling criminal offenses that we don't also take the time to work with people that may not be aware that some of those offenses are even a crime. Right. But generally, and it's one of our goals, and I think it's essential in an operation of any regulatory environment, is to make sure that you're working with people to promote compliance, because that's actually, from a regulatory perspective, that's essential to being able to get the job done. If you have to tug and push with everybody all the way down the line in your regulatory efforts, it's not going to be good for either side of the coin. But with the effort of compliance, and that's not just an effort, to me, of an agent or somebody interacting and warning and making sure people understand, but it also has to do with public information, newsletter contacts, informing, make sure that those licensee groups and those people that are operating within the industry and the employees are aware of what's legal, what's not legal, what problems we have found and how to correct them. And so that is one of the major elements of any regulatory agency, in gambling in particular, because it is so detailed in its operation.
All right. On the public side of that, I was interested to see that in 2 years, 2005 and 2011, I think you did a public survey that you commissioned an outside entity, maybe the university or somebody to do. Anyway, a public survey of a variety of things. Could you explain why you did that and why you did that? I guess I'll put a question mark there.
Commissioner McHugh, the matter of fact, It was a survey conducted by the other university in Washington, I might add.
I see,
And,
okay.
the commission, what actually happened is it was undertaken at the direction of the commission. The commission was holding regular meetings, and what they had looked for is a broader, wanted to tap a broader view of how the commission was doing, what might be important enforcement areas to the commission, those kind of things. So they decided to have the staff contract with Washington State University and conduct a survey with a set amount of questions. And again, that was the first time they did that was in 2005, and the second time they followed up in 2011. It's been a very interesting process, and it's helped identify areas of particular public concern. For instance, underage gambling has and still is an area of concern, I think in many states, but in Washington. And we also asked the question about confidence in the regulatory, the fairness and honesty of the gambling in the state of Washington. And that the percentage that were even in what I call excellent range or the positive range was in the high 70%. So it did provide some very beneficial to the commission, information to the commission.
Is that something that you would think of doing? Here? Is that? Did you find that to be a useful thing to do periodically? Ed Koch, who just recently passed away, was famous for saying, "How am I doing?" all the time, and I wonder if that's a "How am I doing?" that would be useful from your experience to have on an ongoing basis.
Well, the answer to the question would be yes. I think it, but it obviously has to be in the context of the commission and the state of Massachusetts, is because it does provide an evaluation, sort of an evaluation that you don't normally get. I mean, that's always difficult. I know we also do employee surveys, and reminds me of that old, don't ask for the question if you don't want the answer. And so you definitely take a chance when you put forth some kind of survey that fashion. But it obviously has its weaknesses. It's a public opinion of comparatively a small group of people. But it both practically and philosophically has helped the commission with making its daily decisions.
I want to come back, if I might, to the vision statement again, and another one of those bullet points is that the commission will anticipate and respond to the evolving gambling industry. What do you see as the evolution, the trajectory, if you will, of the gambling industry? And in the short term, I guess nobody can predict way down the road what things are going to look. But what do you see as the arc that we're facing now?
Commissioner McHugh, there's several different sides to that question. I think the idea of that particular statement is not to have an agency that sort of stops in its tracks, and what it has today is, and how it does its job today is how it's going to do it in the future, but rather to be prepared to see that the gambling industry is changing and to review rules and processes and make sure that we aren't, again, back to that barrier, that we're able to continue to allow the industry to compete fairly and honestly. And so that's kind of the idea behind that. And an example would be we're in the process, I think it was the American Gaming Association, and started a process of questioning, looking for reform in gambling regulation. And so we're currently in a process of evaluating our entire rules that we have on non-tribal side, and we're also taking a look at that on the tribal side. And so we want to try to determine and identify if there are times of change, if some of those rules at this point have outlived their usefulness, and then it will begin a process with the commission, and then include also the gambling industry as we would move forward. The other side of that, which is very dramatic, is the change in the gambling industry, and it involves from just the surveillance, for instance, used to be all VCR and cover half the interior wall of the casinos. It was dramatic, and now the change has been made to digital, and that's a moving concept. So we also want to make sure we don't have rules that say things like you must have VCR surveillance. That's a kind of a simple side. And then the last part of that is on the electronic gambling, gaming machines mostly, but that's developing far past that. I found the gambling industry is very creative and challenges, and with the competition are always proposing new games, new information. And so the electronic side is a very demanding area. And in many cases, we see those machines in place, probably runs 90 to 92% of the gambling net that comes to those operations.
All right, thank you. I do have some more questions, but I don't want to monopolize things, so maybe I could come back and have a second shot.
Sure,
here.
sure. Thank you, Mr. Day, for being here. As you alluded to in your opening remarks, the Commission has started this very important bifurcated process. We completed our RFA Phase 1. We got some great responses, and but at the same time, we're also writing regulations. We started the investigations in earnest, and we're building an organization. Of course, preparing for Phase 2, which will be coming in this upcoming calendar year. How would you characterize the challenges for an executive director and the Commission on this next year, and how would you go about prioritizing where the director leads, where the director supports other ongoing efforts? Just give us your thoughts on a one-year look ahead, if you will. If that's not too broad of a question, I realize it is, but.
Commissioner Zuniga, I had pause as I read through the rather complex Massachusetts statutes and the strategic plan that's available. I guess I'd almost give it sort of a perception of an iceberg. Is the top of the iceberg. The Commission is working and moving forward. Obviously, there can be no gaming if the Commission doesn't have a process and issue licenses and get those done in a timely fashion. But underneath that process has got to be an agency that is ready to provide investigation and even regulation, which is a daunting task in itself. And I think it provides a lot of pause for consideration as to how to move forward, because it involves, as you might know, anything from just hiring that amount of staff to locating qualified, training that kind of staff, and then in the end, being prepared to license the number of people that would need to be ready to go to work in those establishments. So I've kind of went through my mind too, is exactly how do you go about that? And I have no what you would call a fail-safe plan, but I think there are some definite things to look for. I mean, from my perspective itself, this is all about Massachusetts and the implementation of Massachusetts law and the effectiveness of the Commission. So I think it's important to me, if I were to get this position, to make sure that I was fully informed on everything that's happened up to this point, which will take a significant effort myself. Then the process, I think, is fortunately you have hired a deputy director for enforcement, which I think is fantastic, and I look forward to that. I think that's a significant hire that will be helping out. On the other side, there's probably one area I would like to look at as I move forward is technology. As we were talking about with Commissioner McHugh, is I think that technology and its ability to support the operations, both inside but also relative to what might be featured with the casinos, I think is an essential step and can be very hard to find someone with that extensive experience. Obviously, the systems that we use for licensing process and their connection, which will actually speed our ability to get that done, all the way to things a little bit more on the advanced side, which is potential remote surveillance from locations or remote income reporting from machines, all of which can help to reduce the number of staff and actually give the commission more timely information.
Thank you.
Another, or should we go back to Commissioner McHugh?
Feel free to go
All
ahead.
right. I would go ahead if you've got, I'm going to just run out for 1 second, but why don't you go ahead and I'll be right back.
Okay. I wanted to shift gears a little bit and ask you about your approach to the difficult subject of problem gaming. Your website mentions it. You obviously devoted attention to it in Washington. How do you, what's your general philosophy about how a commission should approach that subject?
Commissioner McHugh, part of that answer is the statutory requirement. And so for Washington State, there is really a requirement that it starts as simply as warning signs in establishments. So it's the idea to make sure the gambling public are aware of the hazards and aware of the help that might be present, and to make sure that's done consistently across the state as best as we can. At the same time, we really believe and have a close association with the Evergreen Council on Problem Gambling. And we work with them to help get the message out. And so it's I guess I would say it's not a proactive role. The commission is not out trying to identify any problem gambling, those kind of elements, but we think it's very important for those members of the public that do have a problem with gambling, that we make sure the information is there and the ability to move in the right direction. We just started participating in a PSA, an announcement with one of the Seattle, Washington stations that is doing some nonprofit work as well. And in that, we're featuring a speaker who talks about underage gambling and its potential connection to problem gambling later in life, and then also carries an enforcement message that it's illegal in the state of Washington and can be followed with civil penalties. And we, in that case, it's both supported by the Evergreen Council and then the Washington State Gambling Commission in the messages that come out. So we've just found that relationship. I guess it would go back to the relationship question we talked about before, that's been very effective and I think very important for the system.
One of the mechanisms that we've found, that we've seen in other jurisdictions are the self-exclusion processes. Do you have any views as to the efficacy of those processes? Do they work? Are they the best that's available? Can they be supplemented in some way? Any thoughts on self-exclusion and how it works?
Mr. McHugh, I think it's a difficult question. From the evaluation point, I think it can be dependent on how it's administered. And I know that Washington has had that debate at times, and at least at this point, the state government has not wished to get into that role. But it is, each one of the casinos is encouraged to do that and does have a system themselves for self-exclusion. And I guess at this point, I think that's probably as effective as having a huge state apparatus to enforce that kind of thing locally and put another burden and, I guess, a potential liability on the state.
Washington, of course, is much bigger than Massachusetts geographically. You have 28 casinos, including the tribal casinos in Washington.
28 tribal casinos.
28 tribal
And then
casinos.
there's about 60 of those mini casinos that we briefly spoke
Right.
of, and then about 3,500 organizations across the state that have some form of gambling license or another.
Okay.
3,500.
So the sites, I mean, you have a huge number of sites as opposed to what we're going to have here in Massachusetts. Is self-exclusion something that you'd be willing to think about, well, let me not close it down there. Are there other things, other forms of approaching problem gambling that might work in this smaller geographic community that would be more difficult to enforce in a population that's as broad as a business population that's as broad as yours in Washington?
Commissioner McHugh, I think what to me, and if I did say that I didn't support self-exclusion,
Right.
that wouldn't be my intended message. I just know that it is, because I hear quite often about the difficulties in a person self-excluded, then goes down to the next
Right.
casino, and
Right.
how that ultimately works in its effectiveness.
Right.
And so, but I think you are correct, with a smaller number of establishments that you're looking at, the exclusion, and lots of times the exclusion process goes for those that aren't suitable to be in a casino.
Right.
And then a similar process is available for those that have a problem and have self-excluded. So it's much easier to enforce in a smaller environment. And that doesn't mean that you can also learn on what's been problematic in various jurisdictions and refine that as it would go into effect in Massachusetts.
Shifting gears, you have a beautiful state out there in the Northwest, which is a great attraction for many people. We have a beautiful state that's an attraction here on the East Coast, and have a mandate to create destination locations and to draw on tourists from out of state in what we're doing. Do you have ideas about the synergy between the casinos and tourism or other attractions to get to enhance the appeal of Massachusetts as a destination for vacationers?
Mr. McHugh, I would say not so much at this point, mostly because that's not been my forte, I guess I would call it.
Right.
But I do know that I watched, because tribal gambling in Washington started out virtually zero, and no casinos, or one or two very small ones. And they have moved from that position to approximately $2.2 billion, I think, in their share of Washington's gambling. And in those cases, they have went through a process of, many started in small casinos. Some of those small casinos actually significant temporary structures, and many have expanded now to include hotels, luxury hotels, have consolidated those. Entertainment venues has been an extensive selection, and matter of fact, it's constant entertainment around the state of Washington. Been different themes for each hotel, restaurants, and so I've seen that. Matter of fact, some of the larger casinos now actually have somewhere in the area between 3,000 and 4,000 electronic machines in play in different places in the state.
Finally, which is probably a word you've been looking for, there have been a steady growth in Washington in gambling revenues over the last, since the 90s. Do you expect that to continue? And is that something which you would expect to happen generally in the gaming industry, in the gambling industry?
Believe it or not, Commissioner McHugh, I have been asked that question in legislative testimony on occasion. And and I have to stay with what the figures show, is regardless of what year it was that I was asked, the trend continues to be upward. And although they've expanded, the 28 casinos, now the 28 casinos have been up with their entertainment venues. The non-tribal locations, smaller, have actually dropped. But the total for the state has increased. So that where so the effect of casinos, of course, is part of that, and the electronic gambling that they can offer. So in summary, I don't see an end at that point. In Massachusetts, I think what would be interesting to see, looking at the law as well, the concept, seems to me, I have to get more familiar with it, but it seems to me to be very creative in that it also brings a more significant local connection and local entertainment and seems to try to protect and involve the local area of development, which I think actually bodes well for that part of the process.
So if I understand you correctly, part of the increase in the tribal casinos may be attributed to non-gaming revenues that were brought about by the hotels and the other amenities that were part of the casino establishment, if you will?
Commissioner McHugh, you're exactly right, but I think there's no doubt about it. I can't provide that kind of testimony and facts because the numbers I were talking about, purely gaming revenue.
Right. I hear you. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Day.
I had another question, Director Day. As I believe you're aware, we also have responsibility for racing. The Racing Commission was disbanded, and we, the Gaming Commission, took responsibility last June for those responsibilities. We take those seriously. I know that you don't have a racing responsibility. You haven't had that in your prior employment, but have you had a chance to think about that and how both of those important responsibilities, regulatory responsibilities, the executive director certainly would have overall responsibility for both functions?
Commissioner Cameron, you're exactly right. I have no direct horse racing experience, and I have, though, in the state of Washington, the governor has directed the three agencies, the horse racing director, the lottery director, and myself. We participate in regular quarterly sessions to review issues, discuss any potential legislative matters that might be moving forward, and be aware of what each other is doing in the state, rather than moving totally independently. So I'm aware to that extent, so I have very regular discussions and assist horse racing if there is illegal gambling in the state of Washington that might originate from horse racing. The commission will still investigate those issues, so we have worked with the Horse Racing Commission as well in that capacity. And I know, so I know from fact that horse racing has a lot more to do about the horses and the vets and the structure around them than it does with the wagering and the gambling that accompanies it and funds that process. But I am familiar with it, but as you pointed out, it's not on my resume.
We'll be pleased to know that we have a director of racing who is both a veterinarian and a lawyer and knows quite a bit about this stuff. So
that is a unique combination.
Yeah.
The commission is very fortunate.
Right.
We are indeed.
We have a mandate from our legislation to be very proactive in assuring that the casinos have a diverse workforce and diverse supplier base. And that is a mandate that we want to try to implement in our own operations as well. What's your track record on issues of diversity?
Chairman Crosby, and I'll apply that. We don't have any responsibility in the casinos themselves in that way.
Right.
But in the commission itself, that's one of our main goals. Matter of fact, we have a diversity plan that's approved by one of the few things that's actually approved policy-wise by the commission. And so our agency is, I think I'm kind of going on memory here, but if I recall correctly, it's about 54% female, gender-based, and then we have a substantial amount of diversity involved in our leadership as well. So it's an issue we take even into I found that although staff works very hard, at times it's important to check those things yourself if there are particular things that have potential to not move forward. So we do make sure our human resources people are involved in the interviews and that are looking for that. If there's a diverse applicant involved and they are not moved forward, I want to know why. And so we make sure we talk about that, and I'm involved in that part of the position. It's just important, I think, to actually be able to make sure that goes forward.
I liked your response on the issue of, sort of to Commissioner Zuniga's kind of what your strategic priority, the metaphor of the iceberg, I think is very apt. The commission we are primarily focused on getting these initial licenses done and getting the underlying rules and regs that will make the licensing possible and eventually the regulation to take place. And we're pretty well equipped to do that. But there is this whole operation that's going to have to do all the rest of the licensing and do the regulating and the law enforcement and the this, that, and the other thing, about which we know very little. Now, we have begun to pull in some pretty strong people, but I do think that's a very apt, I'm pleased that you see it that way, because I think, the bifurcation, not total at all, but substantial, of the commission focusing on the initial licenses with some support from you and your staff, and you and your staff with some interaction with us, really focusing on building that infrastructure, which needs to be in place pretty soon. So that fits with my idea of this too, which is a hopeful sign.
Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions, Commissioner? Anybody?
Just, would you share with us your personal interest in the prospect of this job and moving to Massachusetts? What interested you to this point?
Just couldn't wait for that 24-inch snowstorm. I know
That's
There's
it.
snow in Washington.
Commissioner Zwinga, there is on the eastern side of the state, not too much on the western side of the state. So it comes down all in the form of water for the most part. And it is quite extensive over the years. But more back to the question is when I was contacted about this particular position and asked, it was kind of a, by the way, would you be interested in? And it gave me pause just for a minute, because in that process we discussed the new law and the complexity of the law and the new commission being created. And so it basically interested me. I've been 11 years, actually going on 12 years with the Washington State Gambling Commission. I feel at this point we've got a solid staff, great morale, even in the process of becoming accredited as a law enforcement agency here in the not-too-distant future, probably this year sometime. So I felt real comfortable with the role I played there and the ability to move on. And so as kind of discussed that possibility and with my wife Jan, but also thought we haven't seen much of the Northeast. And so at the same time, it gives us a chance to, me professionally, to do something that is really remarkable and help create a brand new agency and see it successful. And on the other hand, we can as well get acquainted with a new part of the United States and new people and new organizations. So we decided we'd give it our best try.
We left Pete Carroll behind. You're going to have to leave Pete Carroll behind.
Yes, but I'm already ready to trade my Mariner hat. I've been there a lot, but it's just been tough going.
Right.
I said finally a minute ago, but this, your last response, Mr. Day, provoked, because in looking at your resume, you started the Montana Department of Corrections. You reorganized that. You started the first gaming enforcement unit, did I read that correctly, in Montana? You've started big, important public agencies in the past, and are there general principles that you have put to the used repeatedly to derive the success that you've obviously had in starting up new and important public agencies.
Commissioner McHugh, I'd have to say it's not always the success part, but the experience. And I can say that, and I do mean this sincerely, as I've watched the commission's process and its effort to reach out and listen to various different interests and take some time to make decisions, and that, I think, to me, has been my best recipe of success in those occasions where I've had to do that. Matter of fact, when we were reforming the Department of Corrections in Montana and basically rebuilding it, we held a statewide, what I'm looking for, a strategic planning session involved law enforcement from all over the state, corrections personnel, even some legislators that were spoken victims. And so I've found that making sure that the process you use includes a lot of people, and because I know you're already aware of it, but you'll be going out to issue licenses that will impact millions. And the iceberg we talked about, I don't know if it's sank, but it's not going to get very far if those operations are not successful in the state of Massachusetts.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I asked all my questions
Yeah.
already.
Well, you get the pleasure of having us talk about you now. Commissioner Stebbins has recommended that we move forward with hiring Director Rick Day as our executive director. Anybody got reservations about that, or questions, or?
I will only say that his resume and responses today are very impressive, very extensive, very apropos of everything that's on our plate, building agencies, dealing with Indian gaming, dealing with Indian commissions in several states. So I'm very happy that we have him as a finalist, and I'm equally impressed with his qualifications and responses.
Yeah, I would echo those thoughts. You know, a resume is just that. You know, it's sometimes you see something on paper, but in having a brief opportunity to speak to Director Day and talk about philosophies, I love the task force philosophies, which you are certainly someone who has used successfully. That is very impressive. That's the way to move forward. Your experience is exactly what we need. Your personality. I also had just maybe it's my background, but I knew of one individual who had worked with you in the past and did make a phone call, and this is someone who I think is a tough critic and really had such favorable things, described you as a fixer. And that's probably a term we don't use in this part of the state, but I think I understood exactly what this individual meant, and really could see those skills as something we could very much use and would be valued here. So I concur that this is an excellent candidate for us, and I think we're fortunate to have Director Day move across the country if he accepts, and lend his expertise our way.
I've spent a lot of time looking at the resume, at Director Day's resume, and particularly at the startup of, as I said a minute ago in my questions, important public institutions and the success in doing that, and spent a lot of time on the website of the Gaming Commission out there, the Gambling Commission, and looking at how they operate, and looking at the parallels and the differences, but the parallels between their operations and our operations, and have spent some time analyzing the results, the figures, the financial figures in Washington, the steady growth over the years, and the kinds of things that website reflects, the reaching out to the public, trying to figure out what the public perception is. The vision statement is really right on the money, it seems to me, in terms of the priorities. The emphasis that Director Day has on technology and a recognition of that role that it plays in this. And then seeing all that, and then having a chance finally to ask some questions and to sense not only from the answers, not only a substantive command of the subject matter of what we're asking the director of our organization to do, but a quiet strength that I think will be enormously helpful to this commission as we go forward in building what we're all committed to build, which is a first-class public institution of the kind that you've had experience building elsewhere. So I feel very good that you're here, and I'm delighted that you've made the choice to join us and to put your hat in the ring for this position.
Thank you, Commissioner.
My only 2 cents would, in addition to that, would be that one of the things that's concerned me is there's the relationship between the chair and the executive director, and there will need to be a kind of a personality on both sides, hopefully, that can be flexible and interact and don't let egos get in the way and split up, help figure out these new responsibilities, as well as come into a new situation. We have hired a bunch of strong, we think, very capable directors, and that hopefully the same kind of a personality that'll be able to get to know these folks and work with them as you begin to take leadership. But the contact that I've had has suggested to me that you do have that kind of personality that will have the flexibility and the lack of ego to really work things out and get this thing off on the right foot and help us deal with and manage our way through all the tremendous stress that's inherent in this process and is going to continue to get better. So that's an asset that's hard to really measure, but as I've heard you now and talked to you now, that seems to me to be something you bring to the table, which I appreciate a lot. I think will be really important. Anybody else?
Chairman Crosby, just from the aspect, I just kind of want to reinforce that part of the question is I've had positions at this point where I've come in several times, and I have a tremendous confidence in the people that are there and their ability and capability to do the job. The commission here, I look forward to working with the commission. And yes, I am confident that you and I will have a great working relationship. And I just want to make sure that the staff are aware of that's issue. I don't carry any big ego that I'm the best person to hire anybody, and I understand the jobs of the commission and the need to move forward. And so I appreciate the matter of fact, if there were even more staff there, it would be
Right.
much easier.
Good point. Right.
So
Right.
Anyway, thank you.
Great, okay, good, thank you. Okay, any more love in? Anybody else? Commissioner Stebbins, do you want to take the next step?
Sure, Mr. Chair, I would move that this commission approve of the hiring of Mr. Rick Day to be our first executive director and charge me with completing any of the financial terms and arrangements we need to conclude prior to this official coming on board.
Second?
Second.
Any further discussion? I do have one question I meant to ask. Have you talked about the timing more or less? What would you anticipate, assuming that you two close this deal after this vote, more or less, when you might expect to be here?
Chairman Crosby, we have generally, but not knowing that how the vote would go.
Right.
For sure, we have not touched on it in any great extent, and then I'll have to review that with my current chairman in Washington, but I'm hopeful that 30 days, something like that, would be acceptable on both sides.
Great, that would be terrific, yeah. And it's very important to us, obviously, that you close the door, that you close appropriately and professionally, and so we're totally supportive of that, whatever it takes. Any other discussion? All in favor of the motion to hire Director Rick Day as the founding director of the Mass Gaming Commission, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously.
Great.
welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Welcome.
We're invited to take a seat and sit with us for the rest of our meeting. We will make you available to the press, if there are press here, for a few minutes after the rest of the meeting.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll do
Okay,
just that.
thank you. Great. Okay. It's all downhill from here. By the way, just for the record, Jim LaRosa from jury staff is sitting in the back of the room and has been integrally involved in this. This was not an easy hire. We talked about this. It's a very small world. We're asking a lot to having people move here, and jury staff has really distinguished themselves with their thoroughness and follow-through on this. And I personally, as well as professionally, want to say, Jim and jury staff, thank you very much. We appreciate that.
And I would thank the commission too for, it's been great working with you guys and working with Bruce. It's been a long process, but a fun process.
Right, great, thank you. Okay, public information and education, the ombudsman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As is typical, I've had numerous conversations with communities over the last couple of weeks. The focus has been on establishing procedures with both host and surrounding communities so that everybody can understand our process and how they can participate in our process to the greatest extent possible as we move forward. These conversations have involved how the regional planning agencies can be involved, and it can help facilitate our process. Typical questions that have been raised over the last couple of weeks are, many are related to how communities should understand our timeline. In regard to timeline, communities are working very hard to determine when they need to get involved. Specifically, you have a lot of energy out there in the surrounding community, in surrounding communities that are trying to determine when they need to get involved in the process. And on the other side, you have host communities that are working hard to try to determine the impacts that may occur to their particular host community. And what is happening is that applicants are putting forward designs, they're putting forward studies, and there's a lot of back and forth between host communities and applicants to try to understand what those impacts may be. So in that regard, there are a number of issues about how quickly surrounding communities can get involved in the discussion, because I think all parties want to make sure that everybody involved in the discussion has the best available information at the appropriate time. So I think over the next couple of weeks, we'll continue to refine our approach to how information gets out to all parties. But I think at least now, initially, we need to focus on making sure that surrounding communities understand what the process is and what our timeline is. In that regard, I understand that the commission earlier today, we discussed, some potential modifications to our timeline. In all of my conversations that I have with communities, I point to our master schedule and I say, hey, this is our best projection of the time deadlines that we will be working under. And based on how our investigations go, we anticipate that these will be the deadlines for applications. These will be the deadlines for final awards. So in regard to the conversation that we had about ramping up that timeline, I guess I would recommend that we continue to have conversations with applicants, with host communities and surrounding communities to make sure that everybody can live within our timelines and that we can get out information to all the parties within a reasonable process. It's difficult because you have sort of many different needs on when things need to go, and sequencing is really becoming quite an issue. But I'm not saying that we can't move quicker. I think that we should move quicker. I think that's generally the expectation. But I think that there are a lot of conversations that need to occur, and people need to understand our deadline. So in that regard, I recommend that I continue to work with all those parties to take a look at the anticipated deadline that we discussed earlier to see how reasonable that is. And I don't know if that makes sense to the commission.
Well, it's very important, and we have, as you know, we have carefully resisted people complaining about our speed because we want to make sure that we set expectations that we can meet and that we give ourselves time to do everything right. And even in the face of people being annoyed by that. So we've considered carefully about pulling the slots license back. And A, it is aspirational. B, it's subject to things which are beyond our control. And C, we might not make it. So you keep us absolutely foursquare apprised of what's fair and appropriate. We want to, I mean, everybody wants the feet to the fire. I think we're beginning to understand the process now. I think we can begin to move these deadlines a little bit, but we don't want to compromise the good work that we've been doing.
Right.
We've already taken our hits for being slow, so if we
Right.
need to slow down in order to do this right, then we will. So I'm with you completely on that, and let us know exactly, you know, what the feedback is and what your thoughts are, and everybody out there in the communities as well.
Good.
I think that's something that we, at least let me just speak for myself, tend to overlook. We set these aspirational deadlines, and my focus has been working with, collectively, how we can shrink things down. So when you find something where you can shrink it down, it's sort of an aha moment, but maybe that's shrinking it down beyond where everybody else can go. So I think we need to continue to revisit that, and project that out. Saying
Totally,
that we're gonna-
and I completely agree with that. And we're not locked into these, and it's very important that we stick to our guns on saying we're gonna take the time to do this right. So
Right.
if there's an issue there, we will put it right smack on the table and revise the schedule. Not compromising getting it right is much more important than getting it done quickly.
Right.
Can I build for a moment on a point that Commissioner McHugh made when the schedule was here? John, if you could sort of illustrate us on those conversations that you have. It occurs to me that the host community, by default, an applicant conversation and negotiation is the first one that takes place, is the one that's most advanced. And the steps that you've recommended with the role of the regional planning agencies is subordinate, quote unquote, to that effort. And that is something that we need to start putting in our schedule and reflect it to that end. But would you share how that is being perceived or not, or advanced? You know, that distinction, host versus surrounding.
I think that, you know, as I mentioned, there's a tremendous amount of energy and a number of questions that exist out there by surrounding communities, and they want to get these questions resolved as quickly as possible. But in many regards, a lot of those questions cannot be answered at this point appropriately because a lot of the information has not been finalized, specifically conversations between the host communities and the applicants. So even though there's all this energy to get some answers now, it just may not be there. So part of what I have been learning a little bit more over the last few weeks is that obviously we're all under tremendous pressure to make sure that this moves quickly, but we're trying to do it correctly. The thought, at least in my mind, had been that there could be a lot more contemporaneous conversations that could occur, whereby conversations could occur over here with surrounding communities, conversations could occur over here with host communities, but for the reasons that I just detailed, there might be a need for sequencing a little bit more than at least what I anticipated. So that the conversations that occur right now could be more focused on, here's what the process is, here's what the anticipated deadlines are, here are the plans that have existed today, here are our projections for when the impact studies will be available for everybody to review. And so once those things come about, there could be some sequencing of the conversations with the surrounding communities. And it might need a little bit more nuance than, well, these things are happening now, let's just have all these things happen at the same time and it all work out. It may just not be that way, especially since, inevitably you'll have situations in a community or two that may not be a big supporter of a neighboring application. And that potentially could have traumatic impacts upon the conversations that happen within the host community. And so I think the goal is to make sure that, that surrounding communities have the appropriate information so that they can make their decisions, and that they have it in a tremendous, that there is ample time for them to review any potential impacts. But I don't know if the intention is to get ahead of the host communities when they haven't even made some decisions themselves.
John, I'm sorry, before you go on, I have
Yep.
to do one more quick break, so just.
No problem.
Have a good break.
No problem.
Direct break.
Break or?
Maybe we can just, while the chairman's out, we'll just continue this conversation a little bit. What you're talking about is obviously in many of these conversations, it's difficult to have a sensible conversation unless somebody starts with something more or less concrete, right?
Correct.
And the applicant really has to take the lead in that. Till somebody knows what the applicant is proposing, it's very hard to begin to measure or even discuss the impacts that that's going to have. And so the applicant and the host community are the first to have a conversation, logically.
Right.
But there's no reason that one can't find a mechanism to encourage fairly quickly
Yeah.
a conversation that includes surrounding communities,
Right.
so that as the plans evolve from the conversations between the host and applicant, the surrounding communities can be aware of what's going on and be thinking about it as well.
Right.
So if we could come up with a plan in our master plan and verbally to encourage that kind of sequencing, is that the kind of thing that you think would be helpful?
Right. In many regards, the contemporaneous conversations, I think we should encourage those, because there's
Right.
such bottled up energy that it may be detrimental to applicants if conversations are just out there without any facts.
Right.
That said, we have to be cognizant of the fact that conversations have to be based on something.
Right.
And to the extent that they're based on real information, that is probably in the best interest. So, in terms of sequencing, I think it'll take a little bit more of an art of what is the proper sequence to make
Right.
sure that you
Right.
accomplish both of those missions
Right.
as quickly as possible, mindful of our deadlines that are coming up in the fall.
John, as you're aware, we have two applicants who have yet to disclose location.
Right.
Do you see that as problematic, or as far as having all of those necessary agreements in place, conversations first and then agreements?
I would imagine it would be fairly difficult for some of these to proceed. I don't, again, the aspirational deadline, it is pretty far out, so perhaps that would work. But in regard to, there is a need for applicants to, as soon as they can, determine what their locations are, so that they can, proceed and allow communities to have enough time to have these types of discussions. And they should be mindful that it is not only the sequencing of the referendum vote and the host community vote, but that our process, probably unlike any statute in the country, weighs very heavily what will happen with the surrounding communities, so that there has to be time for those conversations to occur.
From your conversations, and I know you've had conversations with every single
Right.
applicant, do you believe the applicant has a thorough understanding how important that is?
It is something that we continually stress to all the applicants. It has been something that the commission has talked many times. It's been a point of our conversation. So I think that the applicants do have a very good understanding of the importance of the issue to the commission. But again, it's really a matter, and I wouldn't, if tremendous number of conversations have not occurred to date, I wouldn't necessarily point that to that someone doesn't understand the importance of surrounding communities. It might be for the points that I just raised, that in order to have a worthwhile conversation, there has to be some there.
Right, right. Can't be a pure abstraction. Right.
So, one other recommendation that I have for the commission is that as soon as the commission can reasonably do so, that it actually establishes firm deadlines regarding applications and award dates. And I understand that this is probably not likely before we are very, very far along in the investigations, before any sort of firm deadlines can be made. But giving communities the ability to work backwards from a firm date would be very useful.
So
and
you're saying setting the date by which we will require the Phase 2 applications?
Correct. As soon as possible. Again, this is an art rather than a science, and I
Right.
think that we probably are not in that position now or in the very near future to actually set those dates. But giving communities a specific time that they can work backward to figure out when they need to do the referendum vote, when do they not need to go to town meeting if they need to do any sort of determination of consistency with zoning or changes in zoning. All these things have to be filtered in. The other point that I'll note is that since our last meeting, the community disbursements form has been put on the web. It's available. No community has actually taken advantage of that yet, but we've heard from a couple that will be utilizing that form very soon. I'll also mention that we have extended our deadline on the surrounding communities definition to February 11th at 2 p.m. Related to this, but not specific to the definition, Commissioner McHugh referenced the protocols and procedures that communities will, if in the event that a surrounding community and an applicant are not able to reach agreement on an agreement, we have to establish these protocols and procedures to remedy that lack of agreement. This is an issue that has come up many different times in my conversations with either applicants or with communities on what will those procedures be, how will that work. I don't think that there's a tremendous level of concern that information is not out yet, but to the extent that we're going to be working on that, I think that's important. But just because I've had different conversations with different entities at different times, and folks have said, well, would it be okay if I submit comments on that issue to the commission? I would just recommend to the commission that we should just note to all those parties that they should feel free to send comments or ideas to us at any time. The proper place for us to review those comments will be during the regulation period when we review our regulations. But if anybody has any ideas about that, they should probably feel free to send it our way. I just wanted to make sure that if I talk to one party, I got it out to every party.
I think surely they'll have, and that's right, and they'll surely have an opportunity to comment during the regulation promulgation process. But if we take some of these things, as we have been, in chunks, there's no reason why we can't make them available as we have with the surrounding community definitions, available for preliminary comments earlier, so that we can get the benefit of those comments well before the formal regulation promulgation process goes on. So for that one, it seems to me we can try to do that as well.
There are a couple of dates that are coming up very soon. February 11th is the date whereby Springfield may make its decision. As you know, it had just recently extended it to February 11th. And March 5th has been set aside as a date by which the Board of Selectmen and the town of Danvers will to discuss the issue of a potential facility in Danvers before the Board of Selectmen.
March 8th?
March 5th.
5th.
Yep. And lastly, I wanted to just mention one issue that I had, a concern that I'd received from a number of different applicants. It's related to a matter that is on the agenda a little bit later, so I won't go into too much depth, but there is an issue regarding how we are going to treat the public records request, how are we going to treat confidentiality of information that has been submitted as part of the application. There is a level of concern out there about how we're going to treat this information. Is the are we going to treat this information in a similar manner to other jurisdictions? Are we going to go beyond the scope of what was anticipated in the statute? So to the degree that if we determine that we are going to go beyond what is, strictly anticipated in the statute, we've received a request that potentially we could open this up for comment before a final decision of the commission. So I just put that out for the commission to probably discuss at the time that this matter is up for the agenda.
This is talking about the confidentiality of background information.
Correct,
Not
yeah.
the application, not phase two.
Right.
Okay, yeah, it's on the agenda.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 5, regulation update, policy questions update. Is that Commissioner McHugh? Who is that?
No, Attorney Grossman's going to take the lead on that, and I'll supplement it
Okay.
To the extent necessary.
Well, surprised?
A little bit.
Oh,
I'll
well,
come
then
up with something.
no, I
No,
thought-
I'm not that you turned it
Not that
over
I
to me.
threw you a curveball.
No. I'm happy to discuss it. So we're in the process, of course, of continuing to draft the regulations. So we sent around the update grid for your review, and certainly welcoming of any recommended tweaks to that. It was just a way that we could keep track of the process as it moves forward, since there are so many moving parts, including outlining the policy decisions that were made and weaving them in with all of the subject matters. A number of the topics that have come up for discussion here today are subjects that we're actively writing regulations on, and we hope to have those to you within the next couple of weeks, so you can begin to review the draft language with an eye towards, by the beginning of March, having everything up before you and not having to review it all at once. So that's where we are with all this, and we are hopeful that by next week, you'll be able to start looking at some of this language. And as we move forward, we can discuss whether we'll need to perhaps set aside a whole day at the beginning of March to just start plowing through these regulations. But it's an ongoing process, and it's starting to pick up some steam. So hopefully, we can have a more in-depth discussion next week.
In your best judgment, mindful of Commissioner McHugh's concern that we not push ourselves too hard, March 14th still feels to you like a plausible deadline?
Yeah, I think we're starting to really work on some of what I perceive to be the most difficult areas of the regulations, and I think we've made some really good progress in that area, and I think that's realistic at this point. I've had discussions with both the legal and the gaming consultants in the drafting areas. We're getting set plans in place, and I think it's very realistic to hope that we have everything together by the beginning of March. In its draft form, of course, but as you mentioned, that can be tweaked as we move after the public hearing.
Great.
Yeah, starting with some of the things that the surrounding community regulation, there's some of the other ones, we're going to follow up on that. If we can get those out of the way in a general sense, then the rest of it becomes somewhat easier. And so I think Todd's on the right track. In addition, that chart that he distributed that we haven't yet approved, we can look at that and keep track of how things are going over the next few weeks. He distributed the policy matrix. It'd be worthwhile for everybody to take a look at it and see if there are any errors. Maybe everybody has and there are no errors. So we could get that posted, because one of the things we had anticipated doing was giving applicants, surrounding communities, host communities, an idea of what the policy was even before we put it into regulations. So if we can get that up, that'll help get some additional information out.
Would that be on our agenda next week, or once you?
Well, no, it's if you have any corrections, basically the policies are all decided,
Yeah.
right? And that matrix that
Okay.
was distributed is simply
Okay.
a statement of what
Okay.
I think we decided. And if you see any mistakes in that, you can feed them to Todd, and we just put it up.
Okay.
And if we can set maybe a deadline for no later than by the next meeting, so we can say it's up.
Okay.
That would be great. I don't think we have to go and look at it again here
Okay.
in the
Good.
meeting.
I guess, in conclusion, I would just say so that we're basically looking, the first regs that I think we're looking to get to you for review are the surrounding community regulations. We have permitting regulations and the timing of that, and some of the host and live entertainment regulations. I think those are the ones that you can expect to see in the coming week or two.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. IEB report, Director Wells.
Chairman, members of the commission. So the first item on the IEB report, agenda and scope of licensing. Determinations have been made about qualifiers, and most information has been provided by the applicants to IEB. The expectation is that the remaining information will be provided this week. Any applicant with outstanding information that has not been provided at that time will have to explain themselves to IEB, and then a determination on additional time will be made, bearing in mind that we are in a very tight time schedule that we intend to meet. So that's sort of where we are, coming in here and looking at what's been done so far. I'm very impressed. We've got an efficient system going, and it looks like we are on schedule to meet our deadlines. Second item is the investigation status report. 10 of the 11 applications, the information has already been sent to our consultants, and the background investigations are underway. The one remaining will be sent to Spectrum Gaming upon receipt of some additional supplemental information, so I expect that will be shortly. The next item is the processing of public records requests for applications and the review of requests for confidentiality. As you're aware, we've received public records requests for the applications, and there may be more requests that are forthcoming. The applicants were required to submit a second redacted version of the application according to the specimen form that was provided to them. While the majority of those redacted versions have been received, applicants were allowed some additional time to provide those versions, and all are expected to be in by the end of next week. The redacted versions are under review by the Massachusetts State Police troopers assigned to the Gaming Enforcement Unit to ensure they are in compliance with the specimen requirements before there is any kind of public disclosure. Any applicant who has additional requests for confidentiality is able to submit a petition in writing, and that petition will be reviewed by the legal department. Any applicant who's not satisfied with the decision of the legal department has a right to appeal that decision before the full commission in the open meeting. On that issue, a determination will need to be made regarding whether the Massachusetts Gaming Commission responds to individual public records requests one by one, or disseminates the redacted applications all at once. The method of dissemination will also need to be determined. I'm not sure if that's something the commission wishes to discuss at this time, or whether that will be put off, but that is going to be important for planning purposes, and for individuals that are dealing with these public records requests, they need to figure out how we're going to do that.
I think that issue has been on the table, on the surface, just below the surface, for some period of time, and I think we ought to just talk about it now and come to at least a tentative conclusion, and consistent with Mr. Ziemba's suggestion, perhaps give a week for public comment on that and then implement it. But the idea was that the redacted version, geez, the redacted version would be put on the web for everybody to see. And the theory there is that in this day and age, many of the requests for the Freedom of Information Act requests have come from media entities, And there's a high degree of likelihood that when they get the responses, they'll put them up on the web, and so they're going to be there. I think that's almost a foregone conclusion. And so this information we ought to take the initiative and put it up on the web. I think there is the process that Director Wells just pointed out is one that accommodates the concerns of every applicant. There's certain things that are in the specimen application that categorically we're going to treat as confidential in a manner consistent with the statute and our regulations. But if there are some additional things, either categorical or specific to an application that somebody believes for some reason invade their interests, they can request with a statement of reasons that we add to that, and then we'll decide that. But beyond that, it seems to me that the material is public and ought to be available to the public.
Is it fair to say that all our applicants understand that last piece that Commissioner McHugh was talking about, requesting that specific categories or information
The process,
be made confidential?
I would have to check with, those who are in direct communication with the applicants over the last month or so, since, I've just started. But what I can do is confirm that with each of the applicants, which I think is a good idea. That way, if there is some kind of decision here, it makes sense to give some kind of notice to those applicants that this is what whatever decision the commission ultimately makes, so that they can respond accordingly, and they are on full notice that this is what's the plan going forward.
I should also add, I think, based on some of the commentary that I've heard and some of the written material that I've seen, is that there is a belief that in taking this approach, we are departing from practices that exist elsewhere throughout the country with respect to these applications. Throughout the country, they are treated as confidential pieces of information. At least this part of it is. And we are, so far as I can tell, dealing with it differently. And we're dealing with it differently because we have a statute that says applications are public records with the exception of 3 categories of material. And we have drafted regulations to deal with those 3 categories of material in a sensible, functional way. But that difference from the way other jurisdictions do it and from best practices in other jurisdictions and the like is a creature of the legislature, not some invention of our own. And I think we just have to, people have to understand that.
Along those lines, is there a question of timing, if you will? If there is still an investigation with qualifiers or partial information that we've requested supplement what we have, is there a pragmatic reason to temporarily, I don't want to say withhold, but not make that available because it's information that has not been yet completed?
I think that as the information comes in, I think it does make sense that as the redacted versions, come in and get evaluated, it makes sense to put them all out together instead of posting them piecemeal on the website if that's the decision of the commission. As far as, there is a certain, certain forms, that specimen form that's part of the application. So that in and of itself is complete and the same for each applicant. I expect that during the course of the investigation, we may be requesting and receiving additional information, but that's not necessarily part of that initial application. So I would differentiate those two and start with just the initial specimen application, because that gives you uniformity among the applicants, and it's more of a fair process, and then we can look at the rest as that comes in. I also think that the nature of these investigations, it will be complex and it is a moving target. We'll never get that, it will be it would be too difficult to set a date and get all that information out. And I think it would delay getting the information out, being transparent and open and in accordance with the statute, as Judge McHugh has said.
Yeah, and perhaps, let me ask the question perhaps another way.
Yeah.
Would it make sense to wait until the investigation is complete for us to release the specimen form?
Mm-hmm.
Because there could be changes along the way. And maybe I'm just in a scenario that we cannot really anticipate.
Can I speak to that as
Yeah,
being
yeah.
part, involved in this process? And please, if you
Yeah.
disagree, I don't think it would be wise to wait until the end of the investigation. We're talking many, many months. I think that, as we've just heard, it is a public record. I think we could be in a position, however we choose to release that information, to do that in the near future. I know that we're expecting the rest of the redacted versions in the near future. We have given deadlines for that to be received. What there will be, and probably with every single applicant, is additional qualifiers who may be added. So we will be receiving additional information that will need to be submitted to us in both a complete form and a redacted form. So, I wouldn't see any issue with just adding to what's already public information, the additional information as we go along, rather than waiting till the end, which may give the appearance of us being less than transparent. That's just how I would see that issue. But along those lines, knowing that we are not in a position yet, because we are still reviewing, it's a time-consuming process to review those redacted versions for, to make sure they're in compliance with what the regulation states. And then there are others that we do not have yet, so we need that whole redaction process, review to take place. So I see no problem with taking a week for comment that may be of interest to us, to see what those comments are, and is there anything legitimate in those comments, since we would not be prepared within the next week to do that anyway.
That makes sense
Fair
to me.
enough. Thank you.
I just would add, I agree with that. I think I agree with that characterization, and I would certainly defer to Director Driscoll and Director Wells on, doing it all at one time or piecemeal. I think we've agreed all at one time, sometime pretty soon. It's gonna be a moving target, as you said, but we're gonna make sort of an arbitrary decision. Okay, the baseline is done, it goes out now, and as changes come, we do it.
Okay.
So, I agree with that.
Okay.
So could we post some kind of a, we invite public comment on this issue?
Okay.
Kind
Right, with the issue being,
of the release of these on the web.
right,
The non-private portions, the public portions,
And,
subject to
Request.
additional requests
okay.
beyond what's in the specimen, in accordance with our regs.
right.
And I know Director Driscoll did some research into this matter, since she's been fielding many of these questions, and there is precedent. Pennsylvania does, in fact, post the redacted versions on the web. So this would not be a first, if we were to make that decision.
Would the commission prefer that I hold off on notifying the applicants about that until after the public comment, or should I go ahead and do that?
I'd go ahead and tell them to
Go
invite their
ahead.
comment.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, this
Okay,
is-
and use it for that?
Yeah, this is what we're planning on doing. If you've got any ideas, let us know.
Okay, I'll take care of that. That's all I had on the third item. The fourth item was the license category declaration requirement. As the commission is well aware, 2 applicants have yet to declare whether they are seeking a Category 1 or a Category 2 license. Now, given that the commission has decided to prioritize the slots or the Category 2 license, the IEB needs to know which applicants to prioritize to start those investigations and put those at the forefront, so they can be completed in time in accordance with the proposed timeline. So I will be sending out letters tomorrow, weather permitting, to the 2 applicants that have not yet declared, indicating they must declare which category of license they are seeking by February 15th. If for some reason
can't get it out tomorrow, then maybe I would give them till the following Monday, so they have the full week. But I don't see any other way. We've been communicating with them, we've been notifying them, this has all been part of the public process, that we need this information, and I think without a deadline in writing, it's gonna be hard to pin everyone down, so that is the plan going forward.
We did discuss this issue with our consultants, who certainly have considerable experience with these matters, and they absolutely believe that that was a reasonable request to make of the applicants at this point.
I just wonder if it's really more of a question of phraseology rather than whether we should do it or not. Surely, if we want to deal with the slots first, then we have to know where to concentrate our energy. But does it make sense to say in that letter, rather than that you have to make a choice, one or the other, that if you want to be considered for a slots license, you have to have the information by X, leaving open the possibility that they might want to be considered for a slots, leaving open the possibility that they have a couple more weeks to make that decision as to whether they get us the information by then, and that by saying we want to be considered for a slots facility, they're not taking themselves out of the running for a Category 1 facility later. I don't know, I just put that out.
Well, I guess my comment to that would be
Right.
that I think that's in some ways what they've already done, because why wouldn't an applicant then say, yes, I'd like to be considered for both? That's sort of what they've done, so then we would then, as the IEB, need to go ahead and investigate both of those on a priority, where they
Right.
may not be doing, and we may waste that precious time investigating them when we could speed up the process on some others who are actually going for the slots. That's
And
my only concern.
So, I hear that, and that's
Yeah.
surely a legitimate concern.
Yeah.
Suppose one, having in mind trying to keep the competition for Category 1s at maximum, how about if the ante were upped? I wish to be, that they wish to be considered for a slots license, they gotta let us know by such and such a date, and commit to taking the slots license if they're awarded. So, I mean, that puts a little more pop in the,
Well, that was our concern in discussing this matter, was that would be very difficult if we were in a position to award and someone were to refuse because they're keeping another option available.
Right.
That was not something we thought was advantageous to the process.
right.
So that, I think that makes sense to,
I guess to put it in concrete terms, and this may be a hypothetical that we don't have to worry about, but suppose somebody is alternating now between the two and has inchoate but viable opportunities for both. This is a fish or cut bait with the slots thing, gives them a little time to assess where they're gonna go, but doesn't make them declare now that they're not gonna go after the other one if they don't get the slots.
So that would be the substantive difference between the original idea and what you're now talking about
Right.
would be that it would permit somebody to declare for the slots, be required to accept the license if awarded,
Right.
but still be in play for a casino if they don't get the slots.
Now, that, the time is getting short here, but I don't think it's inconceivable that somebody might be faced with that dilemma and want to take that opportunity.
the timing is not, it's not as if we're going to be investigating everyone, every applicant. We're moving forward, we're just prioritizing,
Right.
meaning if
Right.
it takes additional resources to get this done in a timely, we'll use our resources accordingly.
Right.
I think it would be very difficult for someone to wait until we're awarding and then try to go in a different direction at that point with a new community. I think that would be very difficult because those investigations would maybe be only a month behind. you know, and we would be
I
well.
agree with you, but I agree, but I think Commissioner McHugh does too, but there's no real reason not to do it. If there's a 1 in 100 chance that it keeps another casino competitor in the game, or a 1 in 1,000 chance, there's no downside to it,
That's why I was looking for the downside, and I just can't see
Right.
one, from our standpoint.
from our standpoint.
And maybe,
Yeah.
yeah, I agree with you.
Isn't the risk effectively borne by the applicant if they are ultimately really pursuing a slots, a Category 2 license, and don't identify it, and the IEB moves forward, and all of a sudden, and we move forward with the RFA 2 for the Category 2, their ability to respond shrinks because our deadline continues to be the same. Their ability to put together a proposal, let's say, a thoughtful proposal, unless they already have it and they're playing really two options. Or I guess I'm rhetorically asking whether we just proceed with who's made the
Well,
declarations.
so play that out. So let's say there are 2 known bidders now.
Yes.
For slots. We move ahead on them.
Yes.
We don't make anybody else make a decision.
Yes.
And so at the end of the 2 background checks for the 2 who are in, we then say, okay, it's now closed, and we're switching to.
No, it's not necessarily
phase
closed. Remember, our timeline has us projecting an April, give or take, decision on the background investigations of the slots parlor. And, but continues until June for the rest of the investigations. Assume that we get to April, and we only have the 2 known applicants for the Category 1 license. And the investigation on the other entities has progressed to some degree, maybe or maybe not. Our process for bidding out the licenses will continue
Meaning-
on those lots are licensed. We
Meaning
will-
we'd have the Phase 2
Right, we'd have the Phase 2.
application ready to go to those
Correct.
individuals. But
Correct.
See, that's where I think we,
And
So those 2 keep moving ahead. Meanwhile, there's somebody lagging behind, and in July, that person, the 3rd group says, I want to be in the slots business.
if they can meet, if they have first been investigated and found suitable,
Yeah.
which may or may not be the case, and they can respond to the RFA Phase 2
Right.
by the
Because that time we
deadline
will have set a deadline for RFA Phase 2.
for RFA Phase 2 slots
For
parlor,
slots.
as long as they can meet that.
Right.
I guess I'm speculating whether,
Yeah. Do we need to force them to decide?
Right.
Or does the process in effect
does it?
do it without us forcing?
I mean, I'm imagining that they run the risk of, if they haven't developed a viable option, drawn drawings, made studies, et cetera, for a Category 2, because they don't know, because they have 2 options, sorry, then they run the risk of not being able to respond on their own to the RFA Phase 2. I don't, I'm speculating, but.
yeah, my experience is unless we set deadlines,
On the deadline.
they
Yeah.
want more time and will take more time and ask for extensions. And then you're in a position where, are we being fair to the communities? We're saying, you know, you're asking for more time, and everyone else has done this by the numbers, and let us know what category, and which allows us to use our resources properly. I see issues along, okay, I'm getting the application late, I'm going to need more time, and then we're in a position of saying, no, you can't have more time, and the communities are probably the ones to suffer at that point. So I just,
Yeah.
I wonder if,
How did you come up with the February 14th date?
That had been recommended.
well, it was in a discussion with our.
Valentine's Day.
No, the 15th, I believe, is the
Yes,
date.
15th, pardon.
15th.
And, you know, it was a discussion with the consultants, all of us. We had identified a potential problem, which was, everyone else has advised us, which is really allow us to use our resources and make those plans accordingly, and two have not. And, you know, there have been conversations, and, but, you know, what's the date is what they're asking.
They
So
mean
there-
the other two?
Yes, so, and it is our, you know, when we give a date for something, whether it's a redacted version, whether it's the application itself, people tend to wait till the very end. And they know what the date is, and they get it to you at the 11th hour, in some cases, so.
Perhaps along the lines of what Commissioner McHugh was saying, could we simply communicate that if you don't declare, you will not be investigated at the forefront? We will not assume that you're a Category 2, and you will be placed at the end of the line, and you run the risk, whatever those risks are. Because we will focus our investigations, like we've always maintained, on those people that declare the Category 2 licenses up front.
But there's a problem there with what are the consequences unless we
Yes.
make you declare, unless we do it with the opt-in and with a pop. You know, you gotta take it if we give it, because the suitability determination for the Category 1 license doesn't have to be made by us until after the deadline for the Phase 2 application. So it's entirely possible that investigations are still ongoing, including that applicant, at the time the Phase 2 applications are received for the Category 2 license. And it is entirely conceivable that we get a completed Phase 2 application from one of the people in this category before the investigation into their suitability is concluded and they've been declared suitable. And then what do? We're going to get a request to hold off acting on their application until we finish the suitability investigation, and that throws back the whole, potentially, process for the phase, for the Category 2 license. So it seems to me that we really ought to make people go into the Category 2 pool and devote the attention we need. And then there's a whole bunch of other things. The host community agreement piece you can't get to the host community agreement until you've been declared suitable. You can't have the referendum. So it seems to me you either go into that pool and get this done, or you.
And I believe both applicants
Right.
know that, but they will stretch it out until we give them a deadline, is my.
Is there something material about the 15th? Is there a difference between the 15th and, say, March 1st?
Yes, our investigative resources.
So there's it's beginning to be a practical
Yes,
impact
there
on
is. There
on our
is.
allocation of resources.
Because we're really, our time frames are fairly tight.
Yeah.
And we really, that can become problematic if we wait that long. And again, I think that we, in discussing this with everyone involved with investigations,
Right.
that was a date everyone thought was reasonable because of what's needed to make those deadlines.
Well, maybe we're overthinking this, you know, it sounds like there have been conversations going on with these
Yes,
two
there have.
organizations.
Yes, there have.
They're
They know.
expecting that at some point, we're gonna say, okay, here's the deadline, pick
Which is
pick one
why
or
we
two.
kind of had the idea that we had to set one, because the
Right.
continual answer is, well, how long do I have?
Right, so maybe rather than, you know, I kind of like the Commissioner McHugh's idea, because theoretically it maybe keeps something open, but maybe we're thinking harder about this than the applicants are. We ought to just say, hey, pick one, you know, you were supposed to pick one, now pick one, and
Oh.
that's the end of
They
it.
haven't made a decision, so they're not thinking.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't say that they had to, they were supposed to.
Well, we've said that at some point you would have to pick one.
Right.
And
And then we made those decisions quite a while ago that we were going to try to expedite the slots.
Right. So the market is probably pretty ready for us just to make the decision that you suggested we make.
That seems to be the case, yes,
Yeah.
sir.
So I kind of lean, I think, towards the simpler, just tell us which it's gonna be by February 15th. I don't feel terribly strongly about it, but
I like the idea that Commissioner McHugh was putting forward. I don't know if that's in conflict with your idea.
Well, yes, because he's
It's a
saying,
slight- yeah, it's a
he's a little bit,
slight-
if it feels odd to me to say to somebody, you have to promise to take it, it's an unenforceable promise, you know, it's a kind of an awkward
It is.
mechanism.
It is.
So, I guess if we have a difference of opinion, maybe we should vote on it.
No, I think it is an awkward, I don't feel strongly about it, but I did want us to think about that.
Well,
The alternative,
yeah.
and, trying to, you could get sure, I'll take it now, but I'm gonna do a lousy job, and I'm really
Yeah,
gonna,
right.
I'm not gonna give you a very good deal, I can
I
give you a
don't-
much better casino.
Right.
I
I don't want it, no, take it. I don't want it.
Right.
No, you promised.
Right. So, maybe just pick it is the best
Right.
alternative.
Okay.
So I'll send that out, if for whatever reason I can't get on Monday, tomorrow, then I will give them till the following Monday, so that would
Okay.
be the 18th, just out of
Okay.
fairness.
Okay.
Okay.
Give them a
All right.
week.
Fine.
That's all I have, unless
There
there are
was
any
one other
questions?
issue that came up that I think we were going to tee up for discussion. Commissioner McHugh, I believe, raised the issue about, or somebody, about contingency licensing. If we're going to be giving contingent fees, contingent licenses, contingent upon a bunch of other things happening, what happens to the 85, the license fees?
Right.
And I think we decided, so if somebody gets a contingent license, do we require the 85 million for a category
Talking about a
1?
conditional license?
What if I say, yeah,
Yeah,
a
a
conditional
conditional
license.
license.
Yeah,
Right.
conditional, contingent upon certain performance measures, yes. Like getting federal approval to fill in the swamp or whatever. And the question was raised, when do we take the license fee? Is it once we get past the conditional license, or is it as soon as we give the conditional license, when the conditions are gone or not? And if we take the license fee at the award of a conditional license, and the conditions are not met, what happens to the license fee? Is it gone? Does it go back? What happens? So this is, we can talk about it here a little bit, but I think we wanted to raise this issue, give our partners in this conversation time to think about this, because I think it's a non-trivial issue, big time.
Well, it's also a non-trivial issue because the budget proposals that are now coming out are allocating those license fees, are taking into account the existence of those license fees, which go into the funds, which are going to the people who are planning. And so we need to decide that, we don't need to decide that today, but we
just
need
to
to tee that up.
To expand on that, the governor's office did ask us whether it was legitimate to count on those license fees as coming in this year. And I thought by our schedule, it was pretty likely that we would have all of the licenses award during fiscal 14, which would end in June 30th of 2014. However, I did not think about this issue of conditional licenses, and whether that changes what we've told the governor's office and the legislature or not is the issue we have to consider.
I'm aware of other jurisdictions that have given conditional licenses, and they do take those fees up front because it's incumbent upon, the burden is on the
Yeah.
licensee.
Well, I'm not taking a position on that, that may be right, I just think it's something we've never talked about, and we do need to think it through.
Maybe some research is needed.
I think it'd be helpful to find out what other jurisdictions have done,
Yeah.
Commissioner. If you know of that, maybe we could get some research done this week and put it on for next week or the week
Yeah.
after. But
And invite, participants to give
Right.
us their views of this
Right.
if you want to. So that would be,
Well, I'll just mention, and it's good to do research, but I mean, one of the fundamental conditions of the license is the submitting the fee, so I see it as an upfront. You get a license if you submit a fee. That's one of the conditions.
yeah, that may be where we wind
That
up,
may
but
well be, yeah. It's just never been thought about.
Fair enough.
And I think it's important enough that we should think about it. Maybe we could ask our consultants, what.
That's how I'm aware.
There must have been other such models. Anything else for Director Wells? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you.
Director Durenberger, if she's still here. Good. Item number 7, the Racing Division.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Commissioners.
Good
Afternoon.
This will be a brief administrative update because you're going to see a lot of me over the next couple weeks. So this is just sort of where we are at this time. I would like to commend the Commission on its earlier vote for its candidate finalist for Executive Director. I was not able to speak with Mr. Day and meet him when he was here visiting with other senior staff, but I do look forward to working with him. So
Good.
welcome.
Great.
I reported to you, I believe, 2 weeks ago that our transition from the old SRC was complete. And as it turns out, there are still some ongoing issues with the financial reporting system, our software program. IT staff has been working, trying to figure out what the problem is. We are assured that the data that we need to proceed is there. We just have trouble accessing it. You have now exhausted my knowledge of our IT process. But this does impact a couple of things that I want to put before you. One is the local aid payments, because they're calculated and paid out 6 months, because it's a 6-month arrears process. Typically, in years past, in January, late January, a letter has gone out to the communities that receive local aid outlining what the payments are going to be for the upcoming year, and we have not been able to do that. But that should be forthcoming. And we also have, out of the Racing Stabilization Fund, a number of Greyhound licensees that have checks that were payable in January, and so those are also being held up. We have staff in place. We have, the numbers are going in from the field into this system. We have staff in place on our end in Boston with the vendor codes and, the ability to send it out once we can access those numbers. But for some reason, there's a piece that's missing, so we need to complete that link. I still don't have a date certain for that, but I'm told that it's forthcoming. So I just wanted to let you be aware of that.
Who's working on this?
Well, the software system itself is a proprietary system that is still serviced by its creator. It's a number of years old, and we've been working with him. The IT group that the commission uses, which comes, I think, through ANF, but as you know, that individual that's helping us is also committed to some other agencies, and so it's a mixture. And then we're working with, as well, the IT group, I believe it's HED that DPL uses, and we can go into the alphabets if we want to, but.
So we have three groups working on this?
We do. We do, but not on a daily basis because they all have other duties as well.
But we're holding up, this is holding up payments to, is it holding up payments to cities and towns or just the notification?
It's holding up the letter with the calculations, the notification letter that has the calculations, but it is holding up payments to former Greyhound licensees.
Okay, but town meetings are coming up
Yes, they
here soon, right?
Yes, they are.
Should we think about helping to expedite this in some fashion? It seems to me that this has been going on for a couple of months.
Well, it's
right?
now February 7th, yeah, and so about 4 weeks.
Yeah, and basically the data we're told is there, but
Yes.
we can't read the data anymore for
Yes.
some reason.
For some reason,
And we don't know why we can't read the data anymore
Correct.
for some reason.
correct.
Okay.
Could we entertain provisional payment options? Let's say, look at a prior payment, prior quarterly payment, or and take 75% of that and
Yeah.
and
Certainly
advance
consider
that to everybody so that not one person or city is held up on the entire amount?
Mhm.
Yeah,
I think we
you
could
must
certainly
know,
consider
you
that.
must know to a pretty high degree of likelihood what the number's gonna be, more or less. Maybe that, there's at least two different solutions that have been suggested, both of which I think are good. One is to just, approximate it and go with that, discount it a little and go with that. And another is to intervene, and we could contact whoever we need to contact at higher levels to make sure this is a higher priority. We can do either or both of those things.
It seems to me both would be good, because, but this, it seems to me both would be worthwhile. I obviously don't understand the complexity of this, but if the data's there, and we got a program that used to read the data, and the program hasn't been crashed, and we still have the creator of the program, and it seems to me that I've got other things to do, I can't help you. Doesn't work right. So,
My only amendment to that is, I don't really know how big a deal this is. I don't know whether we really are imposing on some people's lives and on their finances, and if we are, I think we should move heaven and earth to fix it. But if
No,
it's-
and I agree
if
with
it's-
you, yeah.
If it's small potatoes and it's not really gonna be an issue, then let's let nature take its course. But I just don't have a feel for how important this is. But if real people are being affected by this.
They are.
All right, then I agree
Yeah.
with Commissioner McHugh. I think we should move both of those, and we can raise the level of intervention, either who calls the people you've been talking to, or who calls somebody above them.
Okay.
And also think through the idea of the partial.
Because there will be subsequent payments too.
Yes.
We could always true up.
We can also
even
discount
if we
back,
make an
yeah.
egregious
Yes.
mistake.
Right.
Not mistake, but overpayment, let's say. We could, net it out of a subsequent one.
Right.
Okay. We have been inventorying the old files dating back to 1935 that we're in possession of, and we have actually almost completed that. We're going to be trying to find a library intern, a library science intern, to help archive all of the old minutes from the old meetings dating back. There's tremendous history
that'd be
in
fun.
racing in Massachusetts. And so that will be a fall project, a fall semester project for a library science intern, but we know what we
Great.
have now.
that'd be great.
Yeah, and I think it's a very exciting project. We were looking at some of the old binders. Some of them are bound in these old, beautiful leather covers, but I think digitizing them and making them available. I'm also going to contact the Keeneland Library, which is in Lexington, Kentucky. They have it's the largest library probably devoted to horse racing anywhere in the world, quite possibly. So we'll see if they have interest in that as well, because I think it would be great to have that available. We're in the middle of seasonal staff recruitment. We start early because racing will be upon us in the middle of April. And as you know, our background check process does take some time, so we've initiated that process. We'll be doing a large number of interviews over the next 2 weeks. We will have David Murray back with us next week. We will come before you with an update on where we are with the legislative review. And I just want to remind folks that the proposed changes to 205 CMR and 3 and 4 are on the website. Public hearing has been scheduled for Monday, February 25th at 1 o'clock. I think it's in this room, certainly in this building. But those are there. They're open for public comment, and we welcome that.
Great.
Great.
Okay. Thank you, Director.
Anything else?
Thanks a lot.
I think we are about done. Anything else? All right, before we adjourn, Director Driscoll was going to set up for a follow-up with the press. I'm not sure that there's enough press here to worry about. Yeah, so we'll just let you organize it with Dan. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Let's do it. Thank you.